Buck Sexton, co-host of the Buck Sexton and Clay Travis Show. Hi, Buck. Good to see you today. You know, I want to just play this quick clip of Greg Gutfeld sort of summing up how really politically alone this president finds himself at this moment in his presidency. Watch.
Joe embraced rhetoric that was about as unifying as Alec Baldwin showing up on the set of a new Western. Well, it unified America against him, I suppose. Hell, even his allies admit he went too far. When you lose Al Sharpton and Dick Durbin, you are on island, and no one wants to get near you. The only way off is to swim right through it.
And when it comes to Democratic voters and polling, ouch. A new poll shows 75% approve of the job that this president is doing, and that is down nearly 20 points. I mean, usually within your own party, you're 80, 90%, Buck. So what do you make of what's going on here?
It's not surprising to anybody, I think, Martha, that this is a slow-moving train wreck of a presidency, and the problems are likely to only get worse. These aren't situations when you're looking at whether it's the decision to try to push the OSHA mandate, which got struck down, when you look at the way the Biden regime has handled COVID, the economy, inflation. You have a direct cause and effect from decisions that Joe Biden and the apparatus around him have made at various points here that have led to pretty disastrous outcomes. And now that we've seen this, now that the results are in, we've run the experiment, so to speak, he doesn't have the political capital to turn the ship around. He's not in a position to actually gain the momentum that he would need to get something big done going into this midterm year. So right now, people are already starting to say he's the earliest lame duck president they've ever seen. They're saying that the Biden regime is essentially floundering and just going to continue that way. Because what else is the move here? They can't break the filibuster. Manchin and Sinema are standing strong on that one so far. So you're just going to have a lot of talk of the insurrection and telling people to triple mask at home alone and get their fourth or fifth shot. I just don't think that's going to turn it around.
You know, recently several doctors who advised the president recommended that he change his strategies. Zeke Emanuel was among them. Dr. Osterholm was among them. They said you've got to go from shutting down the virus, which the president ran on, to telling Americans that they have to live with it. But guess what? Americans already think that. 81% say, you know what? We get it. This thing has dumbed down, thankfully. You know, we're not out of it, but we're going to go on with our lives. And 14% think it will be eradicated. Does he need to switch gears, maybe in Dr. Fauci's seat or other places like that, Buck, and maybe in his chief of staff chair as some potential changes to start to turn this thing around?
Well, this is what you would expect if they were really serious about looking at not just the science, but the numbers, the data, the reality of what we're going through. They would bring in fresh voices. They would bring in some people who have a different approach to the risks inherent in living your life day to day in the era of COVID. But instead, you have babble and nonsense continuing on. And Kamala Harris, I think, spoke well to this issue because the incoherence of her most recent statement about doing the thing we do every day, and that's the thing we do, or whatever it is she said, that's effectively the Biden administration's best case right now. They don't actually have a way to explain how we go forward with this. So they're going to drag us through doubling down on the madness. And people are waking up and seeing who before, I think, were willing to go along. And that's why the number is down in the 30s for Biden overall. And I think we could see him in the 20s at some point. That's how bad things are going to get.
I mean, Buck, think about it. He had a record number of people vote for him in this country. And I think one of the reasons that happened was because people, you know, enough of them wanted to turn the page, and they were drawn towards what was being presented as, you know, sort of a very moderate, take a breath, take a pause president who was just going to kind of keep things on the rails and make sure that, you know, the country sort of proceeded apace. But that's not what we got. So I keep wondering if one morning the president wakes up and says, you know what? I told the country that I was going to be a president for all Americans. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not listening to any of you anymore. And I'm going to do what I told the American people I was going to do when I ran for president.
Unless there is some major pivot, they're heading into annihilation in the midterms, I think. That's clear to everybody, including a lot of Democrats that I talked to, and the polling reflects that. And to your essential point, Martha, I've said that the decisions he's made have been poor, and we've seen the results of those policies. That's pushing the numbers down. But the overall promise of the Joe Biden election has been shown to be a lie, which is that he was going to bring back normalcy. He would shut down the virus and not the economy, that he would unite the American people. Nobody feels like this is a uniting president. That speech he gave a few days ago was disgraceful. It would be disgraceful for any president, speaking about his opposition in politics on issues of voter ID and things like that. That's what we're really talking about. So it was an outrage, and I think that people know now they were lied to. They were sold a bill of goods. And those who are open to having their minds changed understand that Joe Biden was never the guy, should never have been the guy, and going forward, there's going to have to be some other political approach from the Democrats unless they really just want to see how much Republicans can run up the scoreboard in November.
Well, the Clintons are poking their heads up out of the sand and seeing who notices. So we'll see where that goes if Democrats look for another alternative. 3 more years, though, in this president's term. Buck, good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Martha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.